Well, how many of you like seedless grapes? I know I sure do. And I guess it's because it's so effortless, because it's real easy to eat them. You just pop one in your mouth. But have you ever noticed that seedless grapes really aren't seedless? Look at this red one here that I got in the grocery store. When you cut it open, you'll still see a few seeds, but they're really not mature. And let me kind of give you a little reminder lesson, I guess, maybe in botany and some basic flower development here, but this really doesn't constitute a grape flower, but it will remind you what's happening in this process. It's a perfect flower, and grape flowers are wind pollinated, and the pollen is blown from the male part, which is the anther, and it lands on the stigma, and that's called pollination, and that's what's holding the fruit on. But what is not occurring is usually the pollen tube will grow down the style and fertilize the ovaries. And that's what's missing in a seedless grape. It's really pollination without fertilization, and that's called parthenocarpy. And what's happening is the seeds are still there, they're just not developing or maturing. And so we're getting pollination but no fertilization in this process. And again, that's just an example so you'll kind of know what's happening in seedless grapes. Now the Thompson seedless, which is one of the common ones, when you cut it open, it kind of depends on which one, but the seeds are very small and sometimes you don't even detect them at all, and that's why we think they're seedless. Now, one thing that you may not know, anytime a fruit is pollinized and fertilized, the seed produces hormones that actually causes that fruit to get large in size and increase in size, and that's not true of all fruits and vegetables. But what is happening on seedless grapes, because the seeds aren't developing, usually the grapes are very small. And if you have tried to grow some seedless grapes or been on some tours and seen some of them, these grapes would be very, very small if they didn't do a couple of processes. And let me show you those here on the vine. Now the first one that a lot of the growers do is called girdling. And what they're doing is, once they get their fruit set on the arm out from the main branch, they will go in past actually closest to the branch and leave that arm out, and they'll girdle it. And what they're doing is they're cutting the phloem layer off about 1/4 of an inch wide, and they're doing that all the way around without damaging the xylem. And what that means is water will still come from the roots throughout the plant and give the grapes and the leaves out here water, but the carbohydrates and the hormones that are being generated in this area can't move back. They're trapped here on the edge, so that puts all of the nutrients to these clusters of grapes and help increase the size. Now another thing they do is they use gibberellic acid, which is a product that acts as a hormone that they spray on, and that causes the grapes to increase in size as well. So that's a couple of ways that they get those small fruit to increase in size, where you get the ones like we have here in the grocery store. Now the variety that I'm standing by is Mars, and that's one of our 2 varieties that we have here in the studio gardens. And if you watched earlier on in the summer, you'll remember that we had a terrible problem with the fungus disease called black rot. And we had disease show up on the fruit, and they would turn black and shrivel up from the spots. It would even get on the foliage, and we tried to spray and control it because that's about the only thing you can do. But we had a lot of rain during that time, and it was almost effortless again. So what we found out was, after it dried out a little bit, we had 1 or 2 blossoms that came later on. So we've got a few clusters of grapes starting to form, and they're just starting to turn ripe. And again, this one is called Mars. Now, you can actually grow seedless grapes in Oklahoma. The 2 varieties that we had in the basket from the grocery store aren't commonly grown in Oklahoma. Now, some of the ones that you can grow are Venus, Saturn, Reliance, and Mars, and those 4 varieties were developed at the University of Arkansas, so they're very adapted for Oklahoma conditions. And let me kind of remind you about those varieties. Venus is a red table grape, Saturn is a red table grape, and what that means is you can eat it fresh. Reliance is red, and it's used for juice and jam, and Mars is called a blue grape, which it's really a bluish red color. And it's really a jack of all trades. It's used for table, juice, jam, and wine. But it has a little bit more bitter flavor than some of the other varieties. And then two more that were developed from New York are Hemrod and Fredonia, which again are used as table and juice grapes. So those are some of the varieties that will grow in Oklahoma. Now, if you didn't catch those varieties and you'd like to find out more about varieties for Oklahoma, whether it's grapes or peaches or maybe pears or whatever your interest is, be sure and stop by your county extension office and pick up fact sheet 6222, which is the home fruit planting guide.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.